All right, man. My man Bill Carter's on. What's going on today?
The same. Working hard. How about you?
Man, listen, it's been a long, I think a year and some change for us. We've been at it. We've been going. Sometimes you look back at it and you're like, man, this time has passed. This time has passed. But it's been a fun journey, man. How about yourself? I love the stuff that you're working on currently with student athlete data. So talk if we want to start the conversation, we're gonna start the conversation right on that.
Well, I'd say, Ivan, that, after, you know, developing the marketing agency Fuse with my partners and running that business for almost 25 years, I look back at that part of my career and I have nothing but affection and for my partners and the staff that I work with and the clients we had. And that was an exciting time. It was a rewarding time. And I would say now I've moved into another area, another phase, and I never thought I could be as passionate as I was about the early part of my career as I am now about this. I mean, you know, we've talked offline before about, sometimes you look up and you don't realize it's like 7:30 at night and you haven't left your desk. You've been working all day. You haven't thought about leaving because you're passionate about what you're doing. You're so focused. And I've known for a long time that I really care about student athletes. I really respect coaches and athletic administrators. And I believed that I had a mechanism, a formula that I could educate and help coaches and athletic administrators by informing them about things about student athletes that are not maybe visible to them on a day-to-day basis. And that's what I'm really passionate about. And so I didn't think it could be this good, to be honest with you, but I'm so into it because I care so much about student athletes and I really respect, the coaches and the impact that coaches have.
So kick me off a bit about because that's my world, right? What you just said, for me, it's from being in. I know you were a former lacrosse player at Gettysburg, So where did you get that wherewithal to be like, all right, I'm done here with Fuse and I'm jumping into this next venture, which the world has not even myself, guys, don't worry, has no idea what the end goal is with what you're doing. And I know you mentioned that, you're very intensive about this work, right? So talk a bit about Fuse and knowing that, okay, this is the next step for me.
Yeah. Well, so, um, I was really fortunate at Fuse that a lot of the work that we did for 2 decades was focused on sports. When we started Fuse in the mid 1990s, you know, our focus was really on action sports. And you're a young guy, so this is a little bit of a history lesson, and I'm joking about that. But in the mid 1990s, that was really one of the real growth spurts in sports like skateboarding, snowboarding, BMX biking, surfing, freestyle motocross. And my partners and I really focused on those sports because we really believed in that culture and we believed there was going to be a business opportunity as Fortune 500 companies wanted to attach themselves to those sports in order to reach teens and young adults. And we really focused a lot of our energy on that community, that part of the action sports community, and working with brands for about 10 years. And you know I feel really fortunate to say that our clients were most of the biggest brands in that space. Pepsi, particularly the Mountain Dew brand of Pepsi, Gillette, Ford, Motorola, when they were still sort of a big player in their category. Um, they were all clients of ours. And then over the next 10 years with Fuse, we sort of morphed more into some of the traditional stick and ball sports. We still did a little, not a little, we still did a lot of work in action sports, but we began to move into some stick and ball sports, and that got me reconnected with really, football, basketball, baseball, lacrosse, like those communities. And then sort of another fortunate thing happened, which is Fuse began to do more and more work just in higher education. And so the natural fit for us was to work with an athletic director or work with admissions and enrollment, but often that tied back to intercollegiate sports. And so I had rolling around in the back of my mind for, close to 10 years, this idea of utilizing the kind of consumer insights work we were doing for Fuse, but applying it to college athletics. And I always thought, Ivan, and I could have been, a little bit naive, but and maybe I still am, but I always said jokingly that there's no community, there's no segment or sector that is more reliant on the success of young people as coaches and athletic directors are. And when I think about all the previous clients at Fuse, yeah, they might have been selling a product or service to a teen or to a young adult, but they also had other consumers that they could reach, that they could target, and they could advertise to. If you're a coach or an athletic director, this is it. You have to communicate effectively, influence, educate, and ultimately coach young people between the ages of, let's go drop it down all the way to say 13 up to say 22. I'm trying to include everybody from the youngest recruit, who might be at a camp all the way to, a college senior who's graduating. So if you're completely reliant on your ability to communicate and understand young people, then you should have all of the information possible at your fingertips.
Hmm.
Like many Fortune 500 companies go to great lengths to do, in-depth consumer research. And we were doing a lot of that at Fuse, and I really thought there was a version of that, not exactly the same thing, but a version of that I could do and really get unbelievably valuable, detailed insights. I mean, I hope they're valuable. I know they're detailed insights about young people, and not just young people, but by college prospects, kids who have already raised their hand and said, I'm playing in college. Division 1, 2, or 3, NAIA, I don't know yet, but I'm going to play in college. And then also insights about current college student athletes. I knew I could develop a mechanism to get those insights, and I felt like they'd be valuable to coaches and ADs.
I think that's interesting, right? So now, what part of Gen Z, especially younger generation, that we're coming into information or data, do you think that the athletic departments and athletic directors need, and what part do you think they're missing on the most?
Right. Well, I, I'll touch on the second part of your question first. You know, I have a close friend of mine who's a coach, a current college coach, who said, um, and by the way, his theory is sort of, mirrored or mimicked in other industries, and you can, I think he even stole it from a Harvard Business School, a Harvard Business Review article that he saw one time. But he likes to say, you know, coaches are like any other, a lot of other industries where, you know, 20% are going to be early adopters. They're going to be really dedicated to learning. They're going to try to uncover new information every single day, right? That's who they are as people. There's going to be 50% in the middle. They can go either way. If you show them something really interesting, you can pique their interest. They're probably going to pay attention, and a lot of them are going to end up consuming information if they think it's valuable. And 30% of them, like quite frankly, are just not going to be interested.
Hmm.
And I don't turn negative about that 30%. I mean, you may laugh at this and be surprised by this, but that 30%, um, I just think of them, I'm never going to reach them. I'm never going to change their mind. I think in some cases they're just legitimately, you know, um, super successful coaches. They have their own formula. They're not interested in deviating from it, regardless of maybe how you and I think the world changes so rapidly. But they have a system and they're sticking to it, right? Belief system, they're sticking to it. Um, and I think, to be fair, that 30% also probably has some folks who are not all that interested in or all that receptive to learning new ways and new uh, insights that might be valuable.
Right.
So, so I think what I like to say is that I like to focus on that middle group, that 50%, and I say, um, you're likely going to tell me that you know a lot about your student athletes, and I totally agree with that. Pre-pandemic at least, you were seeing them every day, you're spending hours with them every week, and you're a good coach and they're good student athletes, and you've built a solid relationship. But there are a lot of things happening in that relationship. First of all, you as a coach, like, you're an adult, you could be considerably older than them, you have a whole different um, day-to-day life than they have. Um, they're younger than you, and they are doing things throughout their day that are much different than your experience as a coach. Um, I think that there's a power dynamic that we often sort of push to the side. Again, because the people we're talking about are good people. They're not trying to create um, a challenging power dynamic, but there is one,
Yeah.
right? Um, a coach is responsible for a lot of things, including how much, Ivan, you get to see the field or the court or the track. Are you a starter? Are you not a starter? What kind of often he or she is dictating the kind of relationship that ultimately is going to they are going to have with you. And I think inherently you as a student athlete know that. And so you can have a really good relationship with a coach. I'd even say you could have a great relationship with a coach, but you could still be holding back. You could still not be completely upfront with your feelings, your beliefs. There's only so far you're going to go um, in uh, in that relationship, because the relationship is frankly a sort of an unusual one, right? There's a lot of things on the periphery. So what I like to say, if I'm rambling, but I'm going to get to your question here, I think, is what I like to say is I'm trying to find the things that are first, and foremost about what the student athletes care about.
Okay.
My modeling to identify the things that I talk about is largely based on social media sentiment. In other words, I'm not some 50-year-old guy in Burlington, Vermont, making up the questions
Right.
as to what I think is important for student athletes. And I talk about it, and I think I've used this phrase with you in a previous conversation. It's about unbiased listening.
Mm.
All I'm doing is listening. I want to hear what student athletes as a cohort, Division 1, 2, and 3, NAIA, junior colleges, all sports, male, female. I want to hear what everybody is talking about, and I want to listen, and then I want to frame questions around the things that student athletes are saying are important to them. And by the way, a lot of times, it's not a big surprise, because sometimes things become so important in our culture overall that it'd be impossible to miss, but I still have to get in there and dig deep and find out what's sort of beneath the surface. And I talk about that a lot with coaches. I know I know coaches are great communicators. I know they care about student athletes, and I know they can listen. I'm trying to go a few layers down and find out why students believe what they believe. What is the detail? What's the thing that they don't want to say to the coach? So when I get into the detail around, the impact of the pandemic, the impact of Black Lives Matter, the impact of the upcoming presidential election. Like when I get into that, I want to dig down and get to the information where the coach says, well, I knew they cared about this, but I didn't know this particular fact. I didn't know that they felt so strongly about this part of that topic.
Do you think now we ever get to break some molds of the old adage from a coach viewpoint, right? Because I can tell you a lot that I know from perspective or listening. There's some are still very much confused on the mental health portion, right? It's like, what do you mean? They face this, or what do you mean? They have this, they have that. So do you ever think that it's like that we can use data to deter their mindsets in that, or kind of create openings? And then what is the complications or the impact if they don't in the future? What do you predict?
Right, right. Well, the first part is I think sometimes, you know, what data can do is, serve as a reminder in that, like, how many times as human beings do we need to hear something before it really sets in? Like, I mean, we have to hear, I believe, and we have to hear things repeatedly before it becomes second nature, that it's always on our mind and we're always looking out for it. And I think mental health and student athletes, that falls in that category. You know, I know coaches care about mental health, and I know coaches care about the mental health of their student athletes. Um, but I also think we we can't talk about it enough. You know what I mean? Like it's got to just keep coming up, and we've got to be reminded every administrator from admissions, enrollment, athletics, all the way to coaches has to have that really, you know, at front and center all the time, so they can be looking out for it and and looking out for those challenges that their student athletes are facing. Um, and so in you know when I dig into the sort of data that I'm focused on, a lot of times it's really simple, right? Like, gosh, and I should have the number in front of me because I don't want to misquote my own research, but I'll try not to. When I was doing some work around mental health a few months ago, and I saw, one of the pandemic focused studies I was doing showed that over 50%, I think it was like 52, 53%, but over 50% of student athletes at that time didn't know where to turn for mental health services. Now, there's some sort of subsets in that data, which is that was a period of time where all student athletes were back at home, right? So part of them were saying, well, would I reach out back to my college or university? Or if I really felt like I needed immediate help, could I get it where I am at home in my local community? And probably by and large, most of the student athletes didn't know where to turn. They ultimately probably would have turned to a coach, or another educator, or even a parent to get help. But there was probably going to need to be sort of, that intermediate step before they could find mental health services, back home. But I think my point is, when I'm able to hold up that number in front of a coach and say, look, over 50% of student athletes don't know where they would turn today if they needed mental health services. I feel like that does have some impact. Yes, coaches have heard a lot of it before, but they've heard it in, I think, in general terms that many college students today are in need of mental health support. Many student athletes are, but weeks, days, months go by, and when I'm able to, hold that data point up, put it in a blog post, put it in an email, put it on LinkedIn, I hope that it has impact.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. 'Cause like I said, I go through it a lot, right? And then I have a one of the questions from somebody in the athletic department that I just started building a relationship with. Had a question about, you know, she called it a nerd question, the deep insight methodology into how you go about this, right? If you don't mind going into a little bit of detail.
Yeah, so I can go into a little bit of detail. I'm trying to figure out how much, how much of sort of the secret sauce I talk about, because I'm still trying to figure out a number of things around it. But I can tell you in some detail how I'm doing it, and it's not actually all that complicated. I have sort of a methodology where I start with, you know, first of all, let me say this: all the information that I go to is public. So, of course, it starts with public roster information. You know, every college team in the country has a publicly available roster, and I'm able to, see, names, academic year, sport, gender, and of course the academic institution. So that's sort of my starting point. I'm then able to tie a lot of that information to another public set of data, which is public social media account information. So if you're on a roster, I can search by, name and geolocation and some other factors, and I will likely, but not in all cases, but I will likely find a public social media account that you've created. If I tie those two things together, that's when um, I like to sort of make sure that I'm anonymizing everything from that point forward. Those are the only two times I'm ever going to see your name. After that, I really try to create a system in which we're associating simply a number with who you are, because from that point forward, I am utilizing some tools that are tracking your social media, what you are posting about. So I'm watching videos you post, and I mean this in the sort of aggregate, not one person at a time, but social media, video, copy, images, and essentially I'm trying to identify what are the topics that are most important to you, and how do you feel about those topics? What's the sentiment that you have associated with the things that you're speaking about? And I think the most important thing for me, Ivan, is that I don't have an interest, nor do I think it's valuable to do that on a small scale. Um, First of all, I think I have privacy concerns about that, even though the information is public. But more importantly, I think it loses the impact of big data. So what I've been doing is a version of what I just described, but on a much bigger scale. So right now, I have in my modeling, right around 50,000 student athletes, but I'm just getting started with the build. I mean, my goal is to have a few 100,000 student athletes in the mix. I think there's some researchers that would tell me that that is not necessary, that it's far beyond a statistically valid sample. But to me, more data is going to be better, particularly because it allows me to parse out and talk to coaches in an individual sport. So again, I know I'm being long-winded, but I'll tell you that in a couple of months or next month, I'm doing a presentation at the convention for men's college coaches, I'm sorry, men's lacrosse college coaches at their convention in the beginning of December. And obviously I'll be able to talk just about lacrosse players. And that's more valuable than talking about the student athlete population generally.
No, that's interesting, right? And it leads me to this next deep question is for the ADs and those that's decision makers in athletic programs in college or even in high school, whatever, in college, just focus in, right? How how can big data help them make decisions going forward if they're not looking at it based on your data, but in a sense of what's happening now, right? Because I think me personally, I think everybody is rightfully so figuring out how the heck to get through today, right? But
Right.
there's kids thinking about what's tomorrow, right? And I think the best position programs will start to be like, all right, how do we position what we do now into longevity? And I think big data is behind that. So what is your kind of question and answer to that?
Yeah. Man, we're gonna have to do like a part two of this because I think we could talk about just that for an hour and a half,
Yep.
which we won't right now. But you make me think of two things. First of all, to the coaches and athletic directors and enrollment and admissions professionals who say, I either, basically big data is not for me. I don't use it. And I say to myself, yes, you do. Whether you know it or not, we're all using it every day. If you sign on to Amazon or you turn on Netflix, that thing that got recommended to you, that's big data, right? That's based on your preferences and your previous behavior. And so if if you can buy something on Amazon, if you can watch a Netflix show, and you feel comfortable with that, then you can use the kind of insights that you and I are interested in. You can use those today because that's essentially the same starting point. All we're doing in terms of student athlete insights is serving up this information to say, hey, coach, this is what you should start with to think about. You should start thinking about the economic impact of the current U.S. economy on the job market and what it's done to student athletes in terms of internships they didn't get last summer, interviews that were canceled, this coming fall. The fact that juniors and seniors right now have a lot of anxiety about the market they're going out to job market they're going about to enter. I can serve up information that tells you how they're feeling. That's that's the Netflix recommendation. That's the Amazon recommendation. Now, you should look at that and go directly to your student athletes. Put the data aside. I just tipped you off to something to think about. Now put the data aside. Now you go and be the coach that is about the one-on-one personal relationship that says, hey, Ivan, you're a senior. And I know, tell me about your last summer. Weren't you going to do that, internship at City? And you say, oh, actually, that thing got canceled. Well, and then you get into a conversation about, you know, um, you know, what are you thinking about doing? Are you still thinking about getting a job? I know you were talking about grad school. Maybe that's a good year to maybe go grad school for a year. That recommendation or that insight rather is the early recommendation to tip the coach off onto the thing that he or she probably should be addressing, but then the coach addresses it on a one-on-one way.
Mm. That's so keen, right? And I think I have these thoughts every single day, right? It's because you hear some of the old models and the old ways of doing things, and it's just like, the ones that do have money, they're not spending it right now. Where I personally would be not looking at being fair, but not playing so much defense, right? I will start to like make plans on playing because it's about two things. It's about the student athletes and then the parents, right? And they both live in a world where they're gonna predict what other the next of kin student athletes come. And if those are your stakeholders to the success in your programs, you have to figure out ways that will be intentional to be able to distribute meaningful information to them, right? Not saying we're doing this for the hype and everything, but you're actually practically doing it because they're speaking now more than ever. And with people like you finding out that data and figuring out what they're saying, it's very, very important and key that and these people pay attention to. And I feel like it, right? So let's jump into this. Your study said 62% of Black male athletes have felt been unfairly stopped by the police, and even so, 77% has racial slurs yelled at them or said at them in their time, right? How do you feel about some of the programs that don't hire as much underserved or Black people into their kind of staffings and may not understand the kind of how do I best say it? They may not understand the kind of environments these kids grow up in, right? Because I personally say I have friends that myself, I didn't go to such of a big school, but I have friends that played at the high level and they were really stars in college and, but they would get in trouble because it's like, it's a whole new world. You go from a place where your corner store, your friends are everywhere to Wisconsin in the middle of nowhere where you're just like, I'm good for the 2 hours that you're watching me and I'm playing basketball, but then the other 22 hours is like, man, I have access to it. What do I do? You don't know, right? And I'm not saying that anybody should just feel bad, but I think if you put more people around them that has that structure in a grounded situation, right? It'll create that land of success. You'll be able to reach them more on the academic side, right? You'll be able to kind of guide them more because if they don't succeed in that sport, it's over for them, right? Most of
Right.
them. And it's like they go back to what they know. And what are you kind of your gist around that?
Yeah, you know, as a as a I hope, thoughtful citizen in this country, I am affected by Black Lives Matter, the social justice movement overall in the last 6 months. I mean, it matters to me. I don't want to be preachy. It should matter to everybody.
Right.
But um, and I think even if I didn't feel that way, I would have found it impossible not to find data and insights about how the movement is affecting student athletes, not just Black student athletes, but student athletes in general, um, because it's such an ever-present part of the student athlete conversation, going back to the research sort of modeling I was talking about a minute ago. I mean, it's it's been one of the most predominant dominant parts rather of the student athlete conversation now for 6 months. It would be impossible to ignore. So all I did was say, listen, I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to report exactly what I see. And, you know, I saw what I saw in terms of the conversation. I asked the questions I've asked. And then, even before that data came back to me, I thought to myself, again, I'm going to be extra careful not to sort of maneuver anything here, right? I'm just going to just report the facts, really important, just report what I'm getting back. I try to do that with everything, but I thought that was really particularly important when you're talking about something as serious as Black Lives Matter versus, frankly, some other times that, I'm reporting, data on stuff that doesn't all that matter much or won't be here, doesn't have a lasting impact. But, I couldn't get past the fact. I was trying to make it not about me, not something personal. But I'll tell you, I couldn't get by the fact that as I was getting this data back and I was reading it, I also had, like, literally speaking, I had the, NCAA statistics, NCAA website up, like corner of my screen. I'm like, I have multiple screens open, I'm looking at data and I have it open to the Division III tab, which outlines the demographic breakdown of Division III coaches. 90%, 90% of Division III coaches across all sports are white. 90%.
Mm-hmm.
And, I looked at that and I thought, and by the way, that number doesn't drop tremendously, even if you include all divisions, right? But I remember very well, like having that tab open and thinking, this information I have is not going to surprise Black student athletes. I mean, you read that report. There was probably not, I don't want to put words in your mouth. There was probably not a statistic in there that you either questioned
Mm-hmm.
or were surprised by.
Yeah.
But but my belief is, and I've had a number of conversations, including some really interesting conversations with some coaches and athletic directors from different parts of the country, where I've had coaches say that's shocking to me.
Hmm.
You know, the you know, including some of the stats that you referenced a few minutes ago. Like, I think that was a surprise to coaches because they're not forced to think about it every day. I say this as somebody who played at a Division III school, um, and it's just, I think that kind of information is just critical to be out there, critical for coaches to be consuming.
Yeah, no, it is. With those statistics and those numbers, they're gonna have to figure out some things, to move forward, right? To create it. And it goes right back into this next question, right? 82% of, you said, upcoming prospect care about culture, right? The culture
Yeah,
of the university. It literally leads into that, because what's the culture? Is this, are you, because a lot of them are Googling, what does inclusive mean, right? A lot of them
right.
are Googling, what does wellness mean? What do you offer within those things? What if I go through this? What are you going to have? Is it going to be trusted? Is it going to be privacy? Is my coach going to know? Like, what are you doing, right? So does the power kind of, I'm not saying that it totally should, but do the student athletes start to gain a lot of power throughout this next kind of phase when we start to matriculate out of this?
It's really interesting you phrasing it in those terms and using the word power. And I haven't thought about it in that context exactly, but maybe what I'm going to say, you can connect to that, which is that I always, I don't know about you. I mean, we both of us obviously have been working a lot from home in the last 6 months, and particularly when I talk to somebody that I don't know all that well, or maybe it's the first time we've ever connected on Zoom. I sometimes joke, like, it's not a canned joke. I mean, it's real, which is, listen, man, if we talk for an hour and my dog doesn't go crazy barking at the UPS guy, the cat doesn't walk across my screen, or one of my daughters doesn't just come busting in asking about help for math homework, like, that'll be a miracle. Like, those three things, one of those three things is going to happen, right? And it's okay now. Like, if you and I didn't know each other and I told you that, you would say, that's fine. Like, I
Yeah.
get it. We're all in this, right? We all get it. And that's reality. And the reason I'm thinking of that, Ivan, as you're asking the culture question is, you know, I I think people's great reaction to that scenario that I joke about is like, that's a level of patience. People have more patience for one another. You
Mm.
know that if my daughter walks in here asking about math homework, I'm going to sort of wave her off and you're going to laugh, but like, you're not going to get angry about it. You know what I mean? That's just the way it is. And so we have this, like, I think, new kind of um, uh, respect for one another in a way, patience for one another in a way, and I love it. I hope it continues. I hope it if the pandemic lasts, a year and a half in total. I hope this patience lasts for 20 years,
Right.
And one of the other things I relate to that, or I'm connecting to that, is I think the pandemic has reset in the eyes of a lot of young people what's important in their collegiate athletics experience. I mean, I think they're thinking about it. And I'm not saying, particularly for the elite athletes really care about winning, as do a lot of non-elite athletes. And it's always going to be important. But I think there's an there's something about culture, team culture, who I'm spending time with, who I'm gonna like, who I'm just going to school, going to practice, going to meals, going to study hall, like whatever it is, like there's a renewed, I think, focus on, I want to be around like quality people I believe in, because frankly, the pandemic has shown like, I don't have the patience for anything else right now. I gotta just like, it's got to be about the culture. So
Man, I think that was a that's true, right? And I think it leaves it to me to this word, the intent. It's intent, right? What's the intent of you recruiting me? What's the intent of your plans for my next 4 years, knowing what's going on, right? How have you recovered from X and X, right? So what have you spent your time doing? So you're going to get a lot of more questions. I feel like coaches and programs, you're going to have to answer, right? I see a lot of them starting to care more about branding with the name, image, and likeness and different things, which, they're going to have to answer and help their student athletes get to navigate too. So I think it becomes a tricky word. And I really feel like this is where your numbers play a big hand into a lot of stuff that's coming soon, if not right now. So I really appreciate you coming and dropping some gems to us. And I know we can go long-winded on a lot of stuff, but I think we give them enough soundbite and stuff for them to really take into consideration to help them make decisions. So I really appreciate you coming on, Bill.
I appreciate you inviting me. I really mean that. I love what you're doing. You know how much I respect you and the leadership you're bringing to your organization every day, and I really appreciate you invite me to do this.
Man, thank you, man. Thank you for those words. It's always good from a peer to hear those sound words, So let's continue to create stuff and help push, the world past some of this stuff.
Let's just get to next summer, man.